Hello and welcome to the H2P podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gary Morgan. With me, as always, is the beat writer for Pitt Athletics over at DK Pittsburgh Sports, Corey Crisson. Corey, are you enjoying your time off as much as all the kids that go to Pitt are about to?
It's as much of time off as I could get right now. I spent the week up in Mercer County hanging out with some family and friends over the week. I'm currently in the makeshift secondary studio, if you will. If you're watching the video version, there's a jacket arm hanging by my head, so that's the setup we're working with right now. It's been as day off-y as it can be. Obviously, with the NFL draft coming up, very busy right now, and we're getting set to see, in a Pitt perspective, Kalijah Cansey, Israel Abanikanda, Hava Baldonado, etc., take the next step in their NFL futures. So really exciting week coming up here, obviously, with the draft and, just keeping things moving. The spring sports season, things tend to die down a little bit, especially after the spring games. But there is still Pitt hoops news it's wild. We're in April and we're leading the show again with Pitt hoops.
Well, we keep talking about how we'll let the news take us where it takes us, right? And the news keeps taking us back to Pitt hoops. It's not like we're seeking it out, but they're doing stuff. So we have a few items here we wanted to hit on before we get into some of the draft capital. So let's start with that. First, Jeff Capel added a veteran piece to his backcourt, getting Ishmael Leggert. I don't know anything about him. I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about him, but I know you do. And I'm not going to sit here and read your article to everybody. You tell them what you wrote about, man.
Yeah, this was a necessary move for Jeff Capel to get another guard out of the portal. And when you look at Ish Leggett, as far as a profile is concerned and what type of a player he screams Jamarius Burton off the tape and off paper, just looking at what he does with the basketball in his hands. So 6'3", so just a bit shorter than Jamarius, doesn't shoot the three particularly well, only about 32%. But what he can do is drive. He can penetrate. He can pass. He's a high-scoring guard from, again, kind of like what Pitt got with Zach Austin from the forwards in the front court. They get a high-scoring, another guy that can put the ball in, although he doesn't shoot it well from three. He was tremendous at Rhode Island for a really bad Rhode Island team, too.
Yeah.
So, this was just Jeff Capel finding essentially what is the best player on a mid-major program and finding a way and finding how that fits in. Remember, the whole theme of last year's offseason, what it turned out to be was, they go out for all of these players from the transfer portal and they find a way to make it work together. And it's about selling the buy-in, right? Well,
Right.
there's a buy-in that worked over the last year. We saw them with the NCAA tournament run. Now there's not as much of a buy-in. The evidence is kind of there. So when you look at Ish Leggett and you watch the film on him, he's a creator. He's a facilitator. He can get inside despite his size. He's less of a true point guard. I'll put it this way, than a Nelly Cummings is, but he's more of a facilitator, and I put that in the air quotes, than like a Jamarius Burton is, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense, and they definitely have a need there. I think that he's doing the best he can to kind of keep ball movers coming in. That is a lot of what's leaving. So I mean, we're keeping a lot of the bigs, we're keeping a lot of the power forwards, and you kind of have that whole backcourt remaking itself. I expected there to be a lot coming in, so good news, I think, by all accounts there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean 16 points a game, 5.8 rebounds, 2.3 assists. He played 35 minutes a game last year, and he started all 31 games for Rhode Island. So he's durable, he's productive, former 3-star recruit. So it's a good get. Now, there's 2 scholarships open for Jeff Capel. So one would think that he's going to go get a 3-point shooter out of that. The interesting thing about Pitt's roster as it sits right now, there are 7 members in the front court compared to, I believe it's 4 in the back court. So I think Jeff Capel's leaning now more towards getting 2 more guards and just shoring up that backcourt I think a 3-point specialist, a la Greg Elliott, is still on the list for Jeff Capel to go get, and then we'll see who else is kind of out there. There's been a lot of targets, obviously, over the course of the spring that have been contacted by Pitt, but have since committed or signed elsewhere, for that matter. So, we'll
Sure.
see what Jeff Capel continues to do as far as who he's getting from the portal and what type of player he's going to go get from the portal. But with Zach Austin and now with Ish Leggett, two really just solid scoring prospects that, Austin and I think both of them, for the fact of that matter, could start day one. But
Right.
if Jeff Capel really feels that, maybe a 3-point specialist, someone to go along with Blake Hinson, can help spread the floor, then obviously he's going to go do that. So a couple of good gets here from Jeff Capel.
Well, speaking of Blake Henson, I mean, Mr. Segway King, Blake Henson, announced that he's going to go ahead and make himself eligible for the NBA draft. Can you just explain to people why that's a thing for the NBA, where players are allowed to go do that, but they can't really do that in the other leagues?
Well, I mean, back in, I guess, the day, NBA player, high school players could go right into the NBA draft at that point. And then it's always kind of been, you can test out on the NBA combine, you can have representation, you can get advice from scouts, but you could withdraw your name from the draft. And that's exactly what Blake Hinson's going to be doing here. He's going to be testing for the NBA. He's going to be, what that means just in layman's terms is he's going to work out in front of scouts and, have them tell him, hey, here's what you need to work on to get to this next level. I don't think Blake Hinson doesn't return to Pitt. I'll put it that way. I think he comes back to Pitt, and I don't see any indication otherwise. But I think this is nothing but good news for Blake, for him to go and see where he stands. If his goal is to play in the NBA and to go play professional basketball, this is a positive thing for him to do. And quite frankly, I wish more prospects would do it, whether they're, gearing towards the NBA or not. Just go get feedback from professionals, not to disrespect the Pitt coaching staff or, what the ACC represents. But when you look at just like the G League nowadays, the NBA, I think, thought it would take off more than it actually has.
Sure.
And then, you look at some of these players like a Darius Baisley, for example, and I'm using that again, cheap example because I'm a Syracuse alum. He was going to be an insane recruit for Jim Boeheim, and then he said, you know what, screw that, I'm going to play in the G League. To his credit, he's in the NBA now, but it took him probably longer than if he just went and played, 1 year at Syracuse and then left. So it's a really finicky, in a way, process because it's not an exact science either. But at the same time, like for guys that kind of know and have the resolve to say, this isn't for me quite yet, or I'm not ready quite yet, this is a really good way just to measure the game up compared to some of the other prospects in the class. So this will be cool for Blake, and I'm interested to see what kind of feedback he gets.
Well, this is a weird situation too. Blake's a notoriously good coachable kid. He'll do whatever, right? Whatever the team needs to win, as they say, Corey. And that's what we've seen from him. Is there any chance that he gets some feedback like, hey, I want to see this from you? That would really probably up your draft stock. And he comes back and maybe has a little pushback when Jeff Capel tells him he wants him to go and basically play the one because he has to for a stretch. And Blake's like, that's not good for my draft status. Is there any of that happens from testing the waters a little bit, or is this more just me thinking as a fan?
Depends on the prospect. Like you said, Blake is super coachable. He's probably the most coachable, aside from the Twins, maybe, on the Pitt roster right now. Like, Blake is receptive, and that's a really good word, I think, to put to just about anything. He is receptive to feedback. He's receptive to criticism. There would be times, of course, where, he would have a bad game and he would shut down, and you know what? That's his way of going about it. He didn't play well. He doesn't want to talk about it, move on. But even when he plays well, he doesn't seem to want to talk about it either sometimes. So,
Right.
Blake can be the most readable guy in the room or the one to get the hardest one to get a read on, if that makes sense. So with Blake, I think that he's going to get some advice from this, and I think he's going to take it with stride. And I think there's going to be maybe a little bit of an element of that. And of course, Jeff Capel, his staff, they want to see the players go, to the NBA. They want to see,
Right.
the Justin Champagnes of the world in recent memory, of course, get that call up, so to speak, and play on the big level. I get that. But at the same time, Blake has to understand that he has a role on this team. And the role that he has on this team is not necessarily the same one that he's going to have if he goes to play for, I don't know, the Toronto Raptors. There's
Sure.
just a different breed of game between college and especially in the ACC compared to the NBA. So I think there's going to be good feedback. I think there's going to be opportunity for Blake to learn from it and to grow from it, and to maybe he'll apply those to an individual context off the floor, because his game does speak for itself. We've seen
Sure.
Blake Hinson light it up and do some incredible things with the basketball. So it'll be an interesting, dynamic to look forward to and to watch for. And, what I think it comes down to, I think Blake is going to take this and make a positive out of it.
Sure. Hey, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk one more little Pitt Hoops note, and then we'll move on into some of the draft eligibles here. For those of you watching on video, it's just going to be us sitting here for a couple seconds. Audio, real break. All right, and we are back to the H2P podcast here on DK Pittsburgh Sports. And Corey, we left off talking about Pitt Hoops. We're going to jump right back into Pitt Hoops. John Hughley also committed to Oklahoma, so his transfer portal dreams have been fulfilled. And I saw some of the things you wrote about it, a little bit of an end of a chapter, beginning of a new era type thing. Just go ahead and give your thoughts on John Hughley's time here.
Yeah, that story I wrote pretty much laid it out, but in a vacuum, John was the best player on a bad team. That's the blanket statement. He was the best player on a bad team, which there's nothing wrong with being the best player on any team. And I don't want to discredit John for, leading a ACC program, being an all ACC caliber player, leading them in points and rebounds, and doing that for the couple of years that he was at Pitt. But at the same time, Pitt was a bad team with him. And part of that, of course, comes to team building and roster construction and all that. But when your best player can't elevate your next best player really to that level, there's something just disconnecting there. And John is a good player. I don't want to discount anything that he's done. He's a good player. He's going to be a good player at Oklahoma, we hope. But he's kind of going into a similar situation this is just from a basketball standpoint, because obviously John dealt with, off the floor stuff. He had a knee injury. He had to rehab. He dealt with personal mental health matters that obviously we hope nothing but the best for, that he could just come out of the other side in a positive way from that. But just from a basketball standpoint, okay, Oklahoma, in the 2 years that they've been under the direction of Porter Moser, who of course took Loyola Chicago, Sister Jean, the Final Four, all that.
Sure.
They are one game above 500 in 2 seasons under Porter Moser. And I say that to say this. John went from being at a sub 500 Pitt program to now going to a barely 500 Oklahoma program, and is going to expect to play. I'm assuming he's going to start if he's going to go there. And, he might have been told, hey, you're going to start, or you're going to be our sixth man, whatever it may be. There's a role for John at Oklahoma. I don't know if I could have said the same about him at Pitt this year, just because of the emergence of Federico, the twins, and even looking at a Zach Austin and a Blake Hinson now, and seeing what they could potentially combo, they being Jeff Capel, what they could potentially combo within that front court. John really didn't have a spot, quite frankly, on this Pitt roster anymore, just based on the winning and just based on the chemistry and the fluidity and how that front court worked out last year. And again, not to disrespect John as a player to that extent, but at the same time, again, it's true, he was the best player on a bad basketball team. So as John leaves, we can kind of look at that era. Really, the only player left from those sub 500 Pitt teams is Will Jeffress, and he didn't play last year. So much of those players that, quite frankly, just couldn't win at Pitt are now gone. You look at last year, it was the new transfers. It was Blake Hinson emerging. It was Federico. It was the twins emerging. So the new era that I talked about is exactly that. And looking at John, that just kind of, to me, is a symbolism, is a microcosm of Jeff Capel's first 4 years at Pitt and what they represented.
And it's also, I think Pitt, in a way, if I'm the coaching staff, I feel a little bit hard done by, I would say. We stood by you, while you were injured. We stood by you when you needed to step away from the game. Nobody said anything negative about him, and then he's in the transfer portal. They find out while they're in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. A lot of that kind of just smelled a little funny, at least from a fan's perspective here, looking at the situation. And I mean, I'm just as happy to have him transferred at this point, because if you don't want to be here, you don't want to be here, right?
Well, and that's valid. If the Pitt staff feels that way, and what, to our knowledge, what we know is that the support staff gave John the opportunity to utilize the services to remain with the team. John felt in January he had to step away. Whatever was going on personally, whatever was going on in his own life, to our knowledge, this is not like malicious against Jeff Capel or malicious against the Pitt program. From John's standpoint. From John's standpoint, to our knowledge, this is a deep-rooted personal issue, mental health matter, personal matter that he is operating through, is operating through. So right now, what we can confirm or infer in a way, I shouldn't say confirm, I should say infer, is that whatever John felt was going on, or whatever John was going through from the time essentially from getting injured up until he left, was he felt the best thing for him to do was completely remove himself from the city of Pittsburgh. And that happened in January. And then he obviously took time to work out. He got in better shape. You look at the Twitter, you look at some of the videos that his high school coach posted on Twitter. John looked in fantastic shape. Credit to him for getting that together. But after all of that, John still felt that the best way for him to go forward, whether it was personally, whether it was professionally, whether it was academically, whatever the reason was to remove himself and stay removed from Pittsburgh. So we can't fault him for that one bit. But again, what we can say now is that John leaving Pitt is kind of just ending what was a losing era at this program.
Yeah, I agree. And speaking of eras, every NFL draft is the beginning of a new era, for every NFL team, and the ending of an era for every college football team. Pitt is no different. They have a lot of players eligible for the draft, and a lot of potential players that really could get picked. Let's take a quick run through that, man. I mean, Kalijah Cansey's the big name. I think he's the only first round possibility, but that's my opinion. How about you?
No, I'm with you on that. Kalijah, again, we talked about, when it was Pitt's pro day and we were starting to ramp up the draft conversation. We talked about Kalijah and the mock draft world, and the mock draft world is very complex. Okay, I'll put it that way. But when it comes to the mock draft world and Kalijah Cansey, he's been mock drafted anywhere from 10th to 20th to the Steelers to the outside of the first round to barely in the first round. Like, he has had so many different just slottings of where he could end up. And I did my one and only, I call it. My one mock draft out of one mock draft that you will see from me between, when was it, Thursday and this Thursday's NFL draft. So I'm letting it marinate for a week.
You mean you're not going to find out that Mike Tomlin shared a deep dish pizza with somebody and it changed your mind?
I will be at Mike Tomlin's press conference on Monday along with Omar Khan. So if I find out that, Tomlin and Kalijah shared a deep dish, and I'll put Kalijah to the Steelers at 17. But anyway, my one of one. And I put Kalijah to the Lions at 18, right after the Steelers pick. And the reason I did that was, number one, there's an obvious connection to make with the Detroit Lions organization, and that's the general manager, Brad Holmes. Brad Holmes was the director of college scouting for the Los Angeles Rams / St. Louis Rams for a long time, and he drafted some kid named Aaron Donald. So, obvious connection there. Detroit needs a D tackle. Kalijah, I would assume, would be there at 18. That, I think, is a good landing spot for him. In my opinion, and I want your take on this, Gary, because we know the Pat Narduzzi defense. We know the system that he runs. Kalijah is undersized for a 3-4 nose tackle. I'm sorry. He could deny it all he wants. He could say, look, I'm a big boy. He is a big boy, okay? 283 he measured at, 6'1". He's a large human. I get it. But for a 3-4 nose tackle, I'm not so sure he fits for that scheme. I think he is more of a 4-3, get on the line, whatever technique, defensive tackle. What do you think, just from watching Kalijah for all these years that you've seen him?
I think he's more of a 4-3, but I think it's more because of his arm length and the ability to stop the run. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think those are his strengths. So I think in a 4-3 he fits better because you can be interior, but he doesn't have to be the interior. And with a team like Pittsburgh, you have to be. So
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see that as a fit for them. I think they'd find a way to use him. Don't get me wrong. I
That's
think
for
he can
sure.
be schemed in,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you can make him one of the outside rushers, or even the left tackle or whatever, and I think he'd be able to make an impact there. But nose tackle, traditional nose tackle, nope,
I
no
don't see
way.
it either. No, I like what you said there, though, about they can scheme him in. I think any team can scheme Kalijah Cansey in. It's just a matter of can they? Do they have the personnel around him? Let's assume it's like New Orleans or somebody, right?
Yeah,
Or even, pick a 3-4. I used the 4-3 there. Pick a 3-4, but find a 3-4 team that could scheme Kalijah in that would have the talent around him. The Steelers have a Cam Hayward. They have a TJ Watt. They have a Alex Highsmith. They have all of these different rushers that could get to the quarterback. And Kalijah, while I think he should play down on the line, he would be an upgrade over Larry Ogunjobi. He would be an upgrade to that D line without a question. He'd be an upgrade to any D line. So I'm curious to know not just where he goes, but I'm curious to know what system he's going to go into. Again, I think the Lions with the 4-3, with the history with Brad Holmes and Aaron Donald, and Dan Campbell wanting to bite kneecaps, and the way that Lions team, by the way, is surging, I think he could just be a huge factor on that defensive line. So
I
with the
don't hate
mock
the
draft
Lions
world,
pick. I don't hate
I
the Lions pick, but I
I
I
think it would
think it.
work tremendously.
I personally think he'll go all the way to the Bills. I think
Oh, that would be scary.
I think the Bills need a defensive lineman badly, and I think McDermott will work with him to make that work.
See, I
I
don't have
think
him going that far. I don't have him slipping that far.
I do, but the only reason I do is because I think it's iffy that he's a day one starter, and to pick somebody in the first round, to me that's almost a prerequisite. Like, as if you're pre-pick 20,
Mm-hmm.
I think anything below 20, you kind of have to have a starter come out of it, unless it's a quarterback and you're going to sit them, for the requisite amount of games to kind of get their feet wet or whatever. But I think if you're picking a position player elsewhere, 1 to 20, they better start.
I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago, and I want your thoughts. I took the blanket statement. If there is one Pitt player that you would like to see the Steelers draft, who would it be? My answer was Servassier Dennis, because I think he could. First of all, the value, it would be a day 3 pick. Number 2, I think he could slide in like dime linebacker, dime backer, whatever it is. He could play special teams. He could do just about anything. I think he'd be a perfect fit in Pittsburgh. If
I
there's
got to
one
tell you
Pitt
what
player, who are
what
you taking?
Savassier Dennis is, though, and this is a good thing. So don't take this badly. He's Robert Spillane. With in all reality, he's going to
Okay.
go 100 miles an hour. He's going to do the things he's supposed to do. He's heady. He's probably not ever going to be your premier feature middle linebacker. But if you need him on special teams, or you need him to fill in, or you need him in a package, he's a great get. So yes, if he was available like in the 4th or 5th round, love it.
Hmm. That would be your guy too, then.
Yeah.
There you go. Look, we agreed. We don't do this often either. We don't agree on like those kind of like vague questions either. That's great. I think
No, I
I
think
think
from a leadership standpoint, he's I think exciting. And I think an under the radar guy is Alexander. I
Deslin.
think Alexander could get some looks. He's got the size that Cansey doesn't,
Hmm.
but he doesn't have the rushing ability. And people
Hmm.
usually want that rushing ability more than they are worried about the size.
See, for me, I think the dark horses in that regard per se, the two that come to my mind are Carter Warren at left tackle, and
Yeah.
then Jared Wayne at wide receiver. Let's not forget Jared Wayne. The obvious pre-connection with Kenny Pickett, what the Steelers are doing with their wide receivers room, looking at an Allen Robinson, they just get the veteran in, which I don't understand how people were destroying that trade. It's a complete win for the Steelers.
Oh, it's silly.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, but like Deontay, okay, you think of Deontay, you think of Pickens, you think of Allen Robinson, you think of the depth behind them. It's not tremendous. Calvin Austin, obviously, we haven't seen yet. But like, could Jared, like a flyer on Jared Wayne? And I'm not sure where Jared Wayne's stock is, because if you asked me before Pitt's pro day, I would have said he went undrafted. But after his pro day and the athleticism he showed, and 41 and a half vertical, he did some really nice things when catching with the catching drills. Like, I think he played himself into day 3 in a way. But do the Steelers look at Jared Wayne, or I don't know what team does, obviously, but like, would the Steelers look at a Jared Wayne and say, well, he's Kenny's boy, like that's an option. If we're not going to get Jordan Addison, might as well get literally the second best thing that
I,
Kenny saw at Pitt.
I have a hard time believing that Jared Wayne is somebody that gets drafted before like the 6th or 7th round by anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and no offense to you, because I know you pay attention to a ton of college outside of what you're covering, but I just feel like you might be shaded a little bit by recency bias. I've watched Jared Wayne play for years, and this last year was the first time that he was really noticeable.
It's fair.
And it was kind of because he had to be, because there wasn't
Fair.
anybody else, that was like ready to step in. I think Mumford kind of had some warts at the beginning of the season, and I didn't really like how that setup was working, and they ended up finding Wayne a lot, and he stepped up to his credit. But he doesn't have like extraordinary speed. I wouldn't call him like a guy that's just going to muscle the ball away from everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think he gets exceptional separation. But again, he's an athlete. He can play a little wide receiver. You can probably shove him in special teams. Good player, good head on his shoulders. 6th or 7th round type guy to me. But I mean, and I don't say that to diminish people. If you can be a special teamer in the NFL, you're a
Mm-hmm.
special athlete. I just think that's kind of where he falls for me. I don't see anybody taking him hoping he makes their wide receiver room on opening day.
That's
You know?
valid. That's valid. No, that's completely fair, and maybe even an undrafted free agent signing, would
Sure.
work best. As far as teams looking at Wayne, I think Wayne could squeak into the 7th round, but too much to be seen there. Carter Warren's interesting to me because of the knee injury he sustained in week 4. He wasn't able to test at the combine. He looked okay at the pro day. He is built like a left tackle, and I think a team's going to take him as a left tackle at some point. I'm just not sure when. Now, like mocks I've been reading say, the analysts and the pundits and the Twitter elite, if you will, they say Carter Warren is like a 3rd, 4th, 5th rounder in some cases. I think for a mid-round tackle, I think that's pretty good value for a guy like Carter Warren, who was all ACC before he got hurt.
Yeah, Carter Warren is somebody that I think you're right about. We probably really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could see somebody decide they really love what they saw and pick him up in the 4th round before somebody else snacks him up, and who knows? It just depends on how deep people really think that offensive line setup is, and I've heard varying reports about that. Some people have said it's super deep. Some people have said it's really a lot thinner than you believe. There's really only one wave, and if that's the case, yeah, you could see him getting picked up even the fourth round, I would say. And then, you know, you're looking at somebody like that to step in at some point, not this year. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think he's a development project type.
Hmm. I was watching some film on Jordan Addison, and I bring him up because he is a former Pitt receiver, of course.
Sure.
I know he's a sore subject for a lot of people, including Pat Narduzzi. Um, his Pitt tape compared to his USC tape is night and day.
Yes, it is.
And I know he got hurt last year. He missed a couple of games with an injury. But here's the thing: he had a Heisman winning quarterback and a Heisman finalist quarterback in 2 straight seasons. And
Yeah.
Kenny Pickett made him look like money at Pitt. And Caleb Williams did not make him look like money at USC, the guy that actually won the Heisman. So I'm curious to know, and this is like, I don't know. This is a question that neither of us could answer, or like neither of us would have the answers to. Like, I wonder out loud what kind of tape like scouts are watching when it comes to Jordan Addison. Are they watching the Pitt tape, or are they watching the USC tape, or are they doing a bit of both and comparing them? Because Addison was amazing. Obviously, Bolitnikoff, just amazing at Pitt. And just watching like the difference between breaking routes, getting separation, like twitchiness, all that stuff. He was a completely different wide receiver in 21 compared to 22.
I would agree with that. I also think the USC offense is much more structured.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't leave any kind of creativity for a wide receiver. And especially a wide receiver that's got a comfortable and familiar relationship with his quarterback, which he did at Pitt. And I think despite like just the Heisman running and Heisman candidate aspect of it, he played with him for years. They
Mm-hmm.
knew each other. They knew what they were going to do. They knew how they were going to go about it. It was like Ben and AB to a lesser degree. They knew where they were going to be. He knew when to turn around. He knew when Kenny was going to be in trouble, vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
I think they worked well together more than anything. I think scouts are probably going to look at the speed. Speed is what stirs the drink in today's NFL. And if you can't teach speed,
Mm-hmm.
he can, you can't teach somebody to run like that. So if it's something that they feel he still has, which I think he does, he survived the speed with the injury and everything. You're right about the twitchiness and the separation, but I just think that was a lack of familiarity with the routes he was being asked to run, and to a degree, not being able to be as creative as he can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious to know where he goes. In my mock draft, 1 of 1, I put him to the Chargers at 21 because I just want to see Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Jordan Addison, Austin Eckler on the same field together. That's literally why I did it. Some of these mock drafts like are way too analysis, detailed, and depth. I did a little bit of that, but I also did a little bit of analysis in
Yeah,
mine.
yeah.
Some of my favorite analysis is the analysis, which is just, I put a defensive end to Kansas City because I like the name. Like, I don't know, I just sometimes it works, and maybe I go 32 or 32, and maybe I don't, and we'll live. So
It's like predicting every NFL pariah Jerry Jones is going to give him the first interview. I
yeah,
understand what you're saying, man. Like,
yeah,
I just think I think Pitt's got a lot of interesting guys here. We could wind up being shocked, and 6 or 7 of them wind up getting picked by the end of this
hmm
whole thing.
we'll
I
break it
think
down next week, huh?
a lot of them will get invited to camps regardless. I think
Hmm.
there'll be a lot of undrafted free agents out of this class. But NFLers are NFLers, man. Doesn't really matter how they come, and nothing you can do but be proud of this group. I think they've done some great things. Like we didn't even talk about like
Hopper Baldonado is another one I had
yeah,
in mind. Hmm.
he's a guy that could absolutely land in on somebody's draft board in the second or even third round, or he could fall all the way to six. I
You
mean,
never know.
you don't
You never
know.
know. He's a freak athlete. We know that. He's got the build to be an NFL DN. So some team's gonna like him. I think he's the second Pitt player taken behind Kalijah. So We have Thursday, we have Friday, we have Saturday, and then I'm sure a week from today, as we sit here on Sunday, we will be talking about the new homes for these Pitt Players.
We'll see, man. We'll see. I think it's going to be a good thing, and I think we should probably go ahead and wrap the show up here, Corey. It was good stuff. I had a fun time, and we will try really hard this whole summer and spring to continue to hammer Pitt sports. But Pitt sports needs to start doing a little bit more for us, Corey. I'd like to see the baseball team start doing something a little more interesting than they have been. They've been very up and down,
Mhm.
you know. Let's see a streak in one direction or another so we have something to talk to.
Softball team, one note: Bailey Japrola, the pride of Brookfield, Ohio, right here.
There you
The
go.
pride of Brookfield, Ohio, making highlight play after highlight play, showing up on SportsCenter's top 10, showing up on the ESPN highlight reel. So good on Bailey Japrola. And again, pride of Brookfield, now the top most popular Brookfield export down in Pittsburgh.
Good stuff, man. So, hey, we always end the show the same way. H2P.